This is our second video for ELA 11. We're going to cover this first poem that we've been given for day 1. We're just on day 1. This is not a PDF of your entire packet because you've been given a PDF per day. Not just one packet to work with this entire time, but a PDF per day. So in order to work on this, we need to get past the obstacle we have here in this blank text. So what I've done is I've sent a companion message with each day. So day 1, you would have a message that looks like this, and it has the full text of what you're going to be tested on, what you're going to be questioned about. So we've got the full text here, and we can kind of work on our questions using this instead of this messed up box right here. Question 1. Based on this passage, Donne views death as a peaceful slumber, an escape, powerless, a graveyard. There are a few of those options. In my opinion, there's 3 pretty good options. If I'm just kind of answering this from memory, there's 3 pretty good options right there. But you're given the text to work off of, and you need to use just the text itself to make your educated guess, to make your inference, to confidently answer this question. Use just the text and not interpretation, not assumption, but just the text itself. Just the text itself objectively. So not with personal assumptions, not with emotions, not how you would put it into your own words, but the closest we can get to what the author or the speaker has done themselves. So we're looking for these options right here. I'm going to go to the full text. We need an explanation of these pronouns because I believe that these pronouns could be a source of confusion for you guys since you're probably not used to them. So what I did was I put myself in the mindset of a student, and I said to myself, okay, I don't know what these words mean, so I'm going to look them up. And that was part of my advice from before, was look up any words you don't know and make sure that you understand them in the context of what you're reading. So I've looked up the difference between or the meanings of thee, thy, thou, and so on and so forth. When I Googled this, all kinds of answers came up. But I was trying to find like a convenient breakdown of definitions explaining the relationship among them. So I went to Quora, and someone on Quora explained it this way. So they give an outline of, there's actually 2 different ye words in Ye Olde Teashop. The word ye is actually a variant spelling of thee. So then he kind of cites his source a little bit in Wikipedia. Wikipedia is, of course, not scholarly. But if you're just looking for a quick answer to something or a general information that's very objective and just kind of factual, Wikipedia is a good place to just kind of quickly go and kind of check your understanding. Sometimes maybe double check your understanding after you check the Wikipedia. But the other ye is an alternate form of the second person plural pronoun you. Originally the familiar or informal form of you, as in like a pronoun you would use with people that you are familiar with, people that you know personally. Early in our education in elementary school, we're taught a lot about first person, which sounds and looks like speaking in I feel, I think, I believe, I saw, and so on and so forth. And then we're taught a lot about third person, speaking about others. They are, she feels, this character must think. And it's usually someone far removed from the situation and not actively involved in the situation. So then we've also got second person. We've got first and we skip straight to third, but we've got second person. What about the one in the middle? Second person is an author talking to you, or be similar to a choose your own adventure story. So you are the second person. You walk into a dark tunnel. Do you go forward or turn back? You get to decide. They're talking to you, the individual, you, the reader. So in a choose your own adventure story, you would kind of be linked to page 40 if you go forward, or turn back to page 31, or so on and so forth. And people do that with Netflix shows now, video games do that, kind of just linking you to another situation so you can be a part of it, so you are interacting and not observing from the perspective of a third person or observing someone's thoughts in first person. And then, of course, we have thee and thou are the archaic, are the old familiar forms of the second person singular pronoun, and are used together with thy or thine as follows. Thou art lovely means you are lovely. Thy brother is handsome, your brother is handsome. Thine ear is blocked, your ear is blocked. So they're saying use thy when followed by a consonant, or thine when followed by a vowel. I give thee this ring, I give you this ring. I see you even though you are hiding. And then he gives a grammatical version of how and when to use these. We're not so much in need of this explanation right away, but you would use this form of the word when it's a subject, this form of the word as an object, and these forms would be possessive. So my, mine, yours would be examples of possessive or ownership. So he's discussing right here ownership. Back to where we were, we're looking for one of these. So based on the passage alone, based on the text itself, we're looking for what the speaker is saying death is like, or how the speaker views death. So we've got peaceful slumber and escape, powerless, graveyard. Graveyard is our throwaway. If you take a look at that, I don't think there's any direct reference to a graveyard. Don't see any benefit to referencing death like a location. Death is more so referenced as a person and not a location. Then we've got powerless and escape and peaceful slumber. Those are all pretty good options, actually, considering the work just from memory, just from like a first read, and trying to get our bearings as far as what it means. But so we know these pronouns. Death, don't be proud, though some have called you mighty and dreadful. You are not so. For those whom you think you can overthrow, die not, poor death, nor can you kill me. So very, very awkward there to try to translate directly. Our speaker here, not the author himself, but the speaker of the poem, is addressing death. They are talking to death, and they are saying, don't be proud, you should not be proud. Even though some people have called you mighty and dreadful, you are not mighty and dreadful. You think there are certain people you can overthrow or actually kill, and you cannot kill them. So poor death, poor you, nor yet can you kill me. You cannot overthrow me, the speaker. From rest and sleep, we get a direct reference. So that's my first red flag that I might want to pick option A. From rest and sleep, which but your pictures be, much pleasure. So we get a close connection of rest and sleep and pleasure. Then from you, much more must flow. And soonest our best with you do go. Rest of their bones and soul's delivery. You are slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men, and dost. And do with poison, so you hang out with poison, war, sickness, you dwell, you hang out with them. And poppy or charms can make us sleep as well. So then we get another reference to sleep, so that's another red flag to me that I might want to pick sleep. Poppy or charms, so essentially drugs, that can make you sleep. And better than thy stroke, why swellest thou then, or short sleep past? We get another direct reference to sleep. We wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, you shalt die. So we get an idea that the speaker is saying that, well, death really isn't a big deal, because death is just the sleep, one short sleep before we wake eternally, likely or hopefully in paradise or into another life even. So I think we've got plenty of indicators as to this is going to be a peaceful sleep. We don't get an escape. There's nowhere to escape into death. Death is like the transition into the escape, but it's not the escape itself. It's definitely a sleep, a slumber, and powerless. We don't get a direct reference to powerless, but it does make death seem rather weak and inferior and kind of pointless. Definitely there go with peaceful slumber, because we get all of the indications and we get all of the instances of the speaker directly explicitly comparing death to sleep. You got question number 2. What is Donne's purpose in this sonnet? To argue that death has no true power. To argue that death has no true power. We already talked about that. To point out that only the best die young. To expose death as a universal truth. To show the many ways that humans can die. So based on the passage, even though these three are pretty good, powerless being maybe one of the best, peaceful slumber obviously being really good, I would throw away escape, because I would say that eternity would perhaps be an escape itself. It's kind of an obscure type of thought. We don't get an explicit reference or description or explanation or connection to an escape itself. We do get direct explanation and connection to slumber. Death is slumber. Then we've got powerless. Powerless is pretty good, and I would kind of almost want to go with that one if it were not for so many indicators of slumber. I would go with slumber, because your task as a test taker is to go not with an assumption so much, and even though it's there, even though it's pretty good, but to go with what is in the passage itself. So then we've got, what is Donne's purpose in this sonnet? You're often going to get test questions that are asking you to define a main purpose. And the way that you approach those questions is that you would find which choices you have that are details, and which one of your choices covers the most of the text, or can describe most of the text. Which one takes up the most space, almost, sometimes. So we've got to argue that death has no true power, to point out that only the best die young, to expose death as a universal truth, to show the many ways that humans can die. I would say that the reason that this conversation, this one-sided conversation, is happening at all is because we already know death to be a universal truth. But some of us view death in different ways. Some of us view death as this horrible, tragic thing that can happen to us, while others view it like the speaker of this poem views it. The speaker of this poem views it as a peaceful slumber. And we know that from all of the red flags. We know from rest and sleep. That's all that it is. That's all you have to offer. And then we've got the detail of to show the many ways that humans can die. Well, that's part of it. That's part of the details. And he's not necessarily talking about all the ways that they can die, but even some of all of the ways that they can just go to sleep, and kind of comparing sleep to death so much. So we've got this detail, this list as a part of the whole thing, and then we've got probably the reason why it's happening at all, why this one-sided conversation is happening at all, and then we've got to point out that only the best die young. Well, to point out only the best die young is right here, and it takes up literally just that one line. So what we have left is to argue that death has no true power. So really what this entire thing is it's just an argument with death, or towards death, or about death. So one-sided argument, a one-sided conversation about death to death. Starting off with claim of the argument would be, death, you should not be proud of what you do, and people should not be afraid of you. You are not mighty and dreadful. You cannot actually overthrow us. And then the rest of it, only the good die young, and all of the ways that we can go to sleep, all the way that we can experience death. Those are just points to the argument itself. Those are just points to support the claim. You can tell from this passage that Dunn believes in the power of mortality. Mortality is the human condition of inevitably dying, like as in humans being subject to eventually and inevitably die. So in the power of mortality. So Dunn believes in the power of mortality, or he believes in the power of death. He certainly does not believe in the power of death, because we've got that really good option up here of powerless, and we've got this right here that we've already responded to. You'll find that these are always closely interwoven with each other. That men are slaves to fate. Men absolutely are slaves to fate, but we also get that death itself is a slave to fate. So it's not really commentary on men being slaves to anything. It's rather a commentary on death being a slave to various things. And then we've got in life after death. So Dunn, the speaker here, is not really fearful of mortality or of death. These two right here are pretty much saying the exact same thing. A and B are pretty much saying the same thing. This speaker here does not believe that death or the inevitability of death has very much power over him. And then this is not part of the commentary. I think that this is kind of understood outside of it, but and part of the reason why this argument is happening at all, but it's not even really a part of it. But then we do get in life after death. The entire reason this argument works about death is it's built on the foundation of there being paradise or eternity or another life after death. The whole reason that death is not a big deal is because it's just a transition into just something else, just another existence of some kind. Then we've got, which of the following best describes Dunn's view of mortality? Mortality is meek and humble. Mortality is not as important as life after death. Mortality outsmarts fate. Mortality is more important than life after death. What I don't like about this question is that each time you see the word mortality, it's pretty much equated to death. And if we were to replace each of these with the word death, then we would get death is meek and humble. No, the speaker's arguing with or about death being too proud. Death is not as important as life after death. I think that that's exactly what we get. That death is not such a big deal because of life after death. And then we get death outsmarts fate. Well, no, the speaker's point is that death is a slave to fate, so that can't work. Death is more important than life after death. That's the opposite of the point. And then we get, according to the speaker, which of the following can affect whether people live or die? That's pretty obvious. You get that directly in the text. It's not sleeping, it's not faith, it's not necessarily wealth. You get this direct list right here. So not much of an explanation beyond that point. The speaker perceives death as, and then we get a direct quote right here. You can find it. You are a slave to fate and all of these other things, and you hang out with poison. It's not that death is poison, it's that death is a slave to these things right here. So I hope that gives you a pretty good example of how to work with this, how to deal with this. You have resources, you have infinite resources online. Just the most important thing to remember is that you're paying attention to the question types. So we've got the speaker's perspective, the speaker's main purpose. This takes up most of the text. This is the text itself, answer A here. You can tell from this passage that Dunn believes in an afterlife because it's all based on the afterlife. It's all based on the assumption that there will be an afterlife. And without that assumption, the argument does not work. which of the following best describes Dunn's view of death? We kind of get that reiterated over and over. We just kind of replace this word with death. It's kind of just there to confuse you a little bit. But mortality is just the inevitability of death. And he's saying that the inevitability of death is really not that tragic and really not that scary. And then we've got, according to the speaker, which of the following can affect whether people live or die. This is a direct quote. This is the test asking you to find a direct quote. And then we've got the speaker perceives another direct quote.